Digital Humanities, and I look at the potential of Prezi, and you can see here this idea of death by PowerPoint. There's a lot of studies and a lot of people that believe that PowerPoint is, and many people have made fun of it for being a death tool you fall asleep to and you don't really understand what's going on. But first, to kind of look at my project and how I took Prezi into the classroom, you need to understand the context of the classroom. Bayside High School, 70% of the graduates go to a four-year college. 90% go to at least a community college, and in general it's a higher SES than the surrounding area in terms of education, in terms of salary, in terms of a lot of the aspects that go into socioeconomic status. Technology available within the school itself. You have 4 labs with 26 computers, a set of flip cameras, 1 tech support staff part-time. His name is Bert. The library staff is trained to support teachers, and then a smart board and projector in most classrooms, as well as 1 computer that is generally used for faculty use, though students can use it if the teacher obviously does not. In terms of the students, to get an understanding of the students, the classes that I did this exact project with were my 1st, 4th, and 7th periods. They were honors classes. There's an increased load of homework and writing. They're on track to go to a 4-year school. They're incredibly self-sufficient and proficient with technology. And most students have technology available at home, including internet. Though I believe that out of those classes, I think that 2 students out of all those classes did not have internet or computer access at home. And they were actually 2 of the better students at home as well. The dynamics for each class to kind of understand. First period is very independent, almost too talkative at points. They work well independently because they have to. It's an athletic group and it's a mid-B average. 4th period, the slowest working, high B average, no real specific dynamic. And then the 7th period is the fastest working group. A high average, works well in groups, but slower than individually working. The activity itself, it's broken into 5 days. The first day is I gave an introduction to Prezi sort of screencast showing the basic ideas of how to create a presentation with Prezi. Students then found a group and selected a prompt, and they completed a prompt-specific graphic organizer, a chart of sorts that was specific to one of the 7 prompts. This prompts ranging anywhere from what were the causes of World War II to what were the outcomes, to what were the major battles in the Pacific or the European theaters. The 2nd and 3rd days, Tuesday and Wednesday, groups were given 2 full days in the lab to research and create their Prezi. Covering beyond the SOLs, quick note-taking, and also creating a quick note-taking apparatus that would allow their peers to also learn while they were teaching. And then, we'll come back to that. I don't know how I got there. 4th and 5th days, Thursday and Friday, in order from causes of World War II to the reconstruction of Japan and Germany, students presented their Prezis. 10 to 12 minutes each for that time period. And here's a copy of the rubric, as you can see. The SOL standards going above and beyond, using cause and effects, talking about the organization, talking about the ability to take notes quickly, all members being able to speak or being involved, and good usage of time, not running over and not running short. And this is the major battles of the Pacific, or the Atlantic, European and African fronts. The data gathered. There are 3 kind of data pieces of data gathered. One was the Prezi rubric and grade, and you saw that. The second was the test grade, and the third was an optional student narrative that also influenced their test grade. And we'll come back to those actually in a second when we talk about the analysis. The rubric grade and Prezi's most barely crossed the threshold of a B, which in my rubric I gave them, if you give me the bare minimums, you get an 80. And most barely crossed that point. I think the average grade for that, for all classes, was roughly an 83. And in fact, actually 7th period, the average in 7th period was actually worse than most of the averages, which was very odd. In each class, a comparison between this test and a similar test given, and by similar I mean it was a similar length, it was it was worth a similar amount, and also the unit was given over a similar amount of time. In all classes, it was at least a 3% drop, as high as a 5% drop, but that was also including the 5 extra non-weighted points that they were given for having completed this narrative, which I think 1/3 of all classes turned in. About 80% of them positive, 20% of them negative. The general consensus here, more time, and this is going to come in, and we'll talk a little bit more about what the students really said. But the general consensus is that they needed more time to really complete this. Findings and reflections, when I'm talking about what I've learned out of this. Student reflections, they really talked about more time, more scaffolding, and teacher taught. They believed really that they didn't learn nearly as well because their peers were teaching, rather than the teacher teaching him or his or herself. Teacher reflections, one question that came, at least in my use of this, was it more than just a glorified PowerPoint? When you're talking about the death by PowerPoint, was it any better than just a glorified PowerPoint? Individual work rather than group work. Would things have moved progressively quicker? Yes. Had it been individual work rather than group work? Looking at this. And the question becomes, why just the bare minimum? And kind of thinking about that, why do students only do the bare minimum when assigned that way? Perhaps it was because the B was the threshold there and they were okay with it. But when I'm talking about really how this is going to impact my future work, I take it for myself, an example from 5th period. In my 5th period class, which is my college level class, I actually took their prezzies and tried to teach with them. And where their prezzies kind of failed through, I actually used prezzies from the other classes and taught them. And it actually worked pretty well. Their grades overall were roughly the same as it was for the last test, but they weren't any worse on that test than they are. Better late than never. And the idea here is, I got a lot of feedback. Perhaps a project like this should be something that waits, and something that should be after your test and after your SOL test, and something that perhaps shouldn't be in there. But at the same point, though, I do believe that I think students teaching students is actually can be something that is very valuable. And the last thing is scaffold, scaffold, scaffold. This goes into this idea of more time. I really think that had there been more scaffolding, perhaps people would have achieved above the bare minimum. But at the same point, whatever that bare minimum is, perhaps they're only going to meet it no matter what. But that's really the idea. And I wanted to just show you real quickly an example of a student-made Prezi that they did for this. And this was actually one of the best ones, and these are for the girls in the 7th period class. And part of that rubric was this timeline, and you saw this rubric already. And they kind of went through and they talked about each of the battles that I had asked them to, as well as a few extras. They went to the Bulge and they went to Berlin. And if you've seen this quick notes, they allowed to quickly go through this. They were actually the most efficient group, and because they had created slot notes, because they had obviously shown what they wanted to have been jotted down for notes, it went quickly. A lot of groups actually just threw stuff up and gave something that looked like this, which if you see here is just simply headings, and they didn't actually say, you need to know this, you need to know this, and so they had to explain it in their within their teaching, which created more hassle, and in fact, most classes ran over until the following Monday, trying to get through. But you can see here, they really do a lot of cool things. They use Prezi to its full potential, which is it's a presenting tool, but they use it in a way that isn't just simply slides. And obviously they were a little wordy, but it is something that they did a really good job in terms of their presentation as well, to not just simply read. And so that's really all I have. Does anybody have any questions?
Do you think it's interesting that they wanted more teacher-centered lecture, but then they were lecturing, and how does all the standards fit into this as well?
The standards, each of the prompts were specifically designed around the essential question for the SOLs. And so they answered each of the essential questions. And so at even with the bare minimum, the SOL standards were completely covered by each of the classes, by each of the people who created them. So the SOL standards were covered. It was going above and beyond, which is what I was hoping for. But I think the biggest thing about the idea of the teacher taught, and I think it goes into this idea once again that I think the more time, the scaffolding might have something to do with it, but it's the fact that a lot of students were left kind of dazed, and a lot of them asked, well, could we have had a review day? Could we have had a day where you had gone through and said, okay, you've learned all this, you've gone through this, here's the stuff that you definitely need to know, let's look at some videos that kind of, cement that in. But I think it really does go along with the idea that they felt that themselves that they were unprepared, and that goes into that idea of more time or more scaffolding within what you're going to have to teach.
And then my final question is, how is that different from a PowerPoint?
Well, that's exactly my point. That was exactly one of the biggest things that I went into that, and it is no different, at least in this use. And so, it's one of those things that it works, it's great for this use. Prezi has a lot of other abilities, kind of creating a treasure hunt of sorts within, but within the use that I had used it, partially due to the sometimes inability to get labs for an extended amount of time, or to do something more. I wanted students to create something. I wanted students to use the technology more than me having to create some technology. And so this was the best idea that I had. But yeah, it is nothing better than a PowerPoint in this sense. But it has a lot of visual stimulation. A lot of students really talked about the visual stimulation, that they enjoyed the visual stimulation of watching this rather than watching a PowerPoint. So it is a glorified PowerPoint, but it does have some use, at least for now. But as Curtis said in his presentation, technology has a point, has a breaking point where it becomes just an old tool rather than something that's really going to keep interest. So.
Thank you.